within the Sunday law crisis, we're seeing them all being brought to the forefront of, I guess, social discourse, of political discourse in different ways. The debate is being brought to the forefront of people's minds, and we're seeing a lot of legislation being passed in different countries around the world, but certainly in the United States. And today we're going to focus on the United States specifically. Legislation which is, really is a precursors to the Sunday law and leading up to the Sunday law. So we want to take a look at some of this legislation. We're going to be going through a number of news items, right? And some of these things you may be aware of, that they're going on right now, and some of them may be new to you. But in any case, and again, I invite your participation. Feel free to open your mic and interject, because I'm looking at my notes. I don't necessarily have the Zoom screen in front of me, so I can't see. I'll flip back to check the chat to see if anyone's contributing there. But yeah, please feel free to interject. So again, for a bit of context, this is the same line that we had the last time I shared. Externally, where do we stand? We stand in a pre-Sunday law history where the Sunday law issue or issues are being agitated. And what is being agitated or shaken is a story, essentially, something that is happening in society. And as Ellen White frames it, as she speaks of this period of agitation, it is a prediction, it's a foretelling of what is coming in the future in a much more serious, severe way, if I may put it that way. So what is being agitated? I guess there are a number of ways we could frame it. But the way I'm choosing to frame it is where all these issues in the culture wars, in the political battles that are being waged in the legislatures of various countries, particularly the United States, what it boils down to fundamentally, where it's leading, is the subversion of democracy and the entrenching of patriarchal oppression, right? And it's within that context that gender equality really becomes a test, really becomes a counter message to the prevailing currents and a testing issue in our time period. Alda Parminder shared a study a few years ago on degrees of inspiration. You may remember that he's spoken on it variously. And the conclusion of that study is that there are two types of prophets, essentially. The first type is us, right? This movement, the Stone of Daniel 2, or the 144,000. The second group of prophets are journalists, those who present the news, present what is happening in front of them, right? Present what is happening in the world. And we are agitating these subjects through a prophetic lens within the context of this movement. But the agitation in the public sphere, because we know that the world, even the Levites and the Nephilim, are not developed by us primarily, right? It is the other prophets that they're listening to, and it's the other prophets that are that have been giving them the messages that are developing them, their early and latter reign. So these external events that the journalists are presenting, not only for our benefit, but for the world, they are a window into the Sunday law crisis, right? And when we look at these external events, we can identify flashpoints, right? Flashpoints which capture the news cycle, right? Which are almost impossible to ignore, such as the repealing of the striking down of Roe v. Wade. So there are flashpoints like that, but a lot of the very damaging legislation, a lot of the progressive creep towards the Sunday law is not captured, is not captured in these flashpoints in the news cycle. It's happening not at the national level, so much as it is happening at the state level. And, generally speaking, we're not paying as much attention, and the news cycle is not paying as, I don't say not paying as much attention, but there isn't as much focus on what is happening at the state level. It does not it does not capture as much attention, but that is where a lot of the, as I said, some of the most damaging legislation is being considered and being passed. And it's really at that state level that you can track the creep of increasingly oppressive state power. I made a point in my notes that it is somewhat similar to the fulfillment of the Battle of Rafia. If you recall, I believe definitely when I was in Uganda, shortly before the pandemic, I did give a presentation on the fulfillment of the Battle of Rafia. And that I felt that presentation was necessary to track all the prophetic identifications we have made and to connect them to their fulfillment in real life, and to.
Excuse me, Elder Ted.
Yes.
There are people waiting to get in.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that, Annabelle. I'll continue to keep an eye on that. Thank you. Okay, my apologies to those who are waiting to get in. So when you look at the fulfillment of the Battle of Rafia, there were people who were opposing the message at the time, who presented the idea that, well, where's Rafia? Nothing spectacular happened. All those predictions have come to naught. But what we've seen, and it's a recurring issue throughout the history of this movement, and it comes into, it becomes especially important now, is that when it comes to the fulfillment of prophecy, you have to know what you're looking for.
Okay, we're going to stop it there, and we're going to just go over what Elder Tabo spoke about in the first 10 minutes. So basically, he's bringing out the agitation of the Sunday law. So what I wanted to do was to look at the word agitation. What does the word agitation mean? Anybody? What does the word agitation mean? Or another word for agitation? Somebody looking at it, or? Curtis, can you help me? Can anybody hear?
Yeah, sure thing.
Oh, right.
Debbie.
Okay, so I wasn't sure if anybody could hear then.
Hi, Debbie, we can hear you.
Oh, yes, I can hear you now, yeah.
So from what I understand, at least, agitation is or refers to a sense or state of, anxiety or restlessness or unease about something. that is about to occur. So, or that may, in our case, that will occur. So it's describing, you know, like that restlessness or preparedness for something that's about to take place.
That's right. And when I was asked, it's so strange, but I actually wanted to look, I looked deeper into the word agitation. And when I looked in the Bible as well, John 14:1, another word for agitation is troubled. And so we know that the Lord spoke about do not be troubled in John 14:1. And like you said, it's a state of what it causes within us, a state of fear or unease, really. And also he talks about the dispensation that we're in, and with about the testing issues that we're to go through. And all these agitation things going out externally are being brought to the forefront. So what did he say was being brought to the forefront?
Comment. The word agitation also means to stir something up.
Right, okay.
There's a philosophy, an ideology, an idea, whatever it is, a personal belief that's now being stirred up. People feel empowered or emboldened to bring up whatever issue they feel is important. And whatever that issue is, the agitation is talking about something that will continue to escalate. It's a forewarning or a prediction that this is not about to go away. It's about to get worse. Stirring up an existing ideology or a thought that people have that's only going to escalate. And when Ellen White talks about the agitation of the Sunday law, the terms themselves, agitation and Sunday law, don't portray this idea, but she's talking about a prediction or a prophecy or something that's going to be fulfilled in the future. So it's also a warning for us, which isn't in the definition of agitation per se. So she uses the term agitation of the Sunday law, I would suggest, in an unusual way, not in a conventional fashion, because she's talking about whatever you see today is the prediction of the future. And that's not how the word agitation normally would be used.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have anything to add to this? So the question I asked was, what was being brought to the forefront? He was talking about things being brought to the forefront. In those 10 minutes, what did he talk about?
Can I just add another point?
Yes.
When we talk about the agitation of the Sunday law, he mentioned about two types of prophets. You may or may not address that point.
Yeah,
but it's
I've
not,
got it written down. I'm going to address it.
Yeah, my only point I was going to make is that journalism is not agitating the Sunday law issue.
No.
As we are not. Although we may be, perhaps we might argue that we should be, but journalists are definitely not. They're just reporting on the issue, on the news, if you like, or they're reporting on the agitation. So it's their reporting that actually brings it into the consciousness of people. Without their aiding and abetting this agitation, the agitation wouldn't be effective. So they are, if we want to call it the part of the, if we want to use the word problem, journalists are part of the problem, although they're not the cause of the problem. They're not, and I say problem as in agitation. They aid and abet the agitation, but they're not the originators of it. They're just reporting, and their reporting actually snowballs this agitation, so it becomes a serious issue, because if they didn't report upon it, it wouldn't be a massive issue.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And Emma, the first 10 minutes, welcome back, by the way. And Natalie, what do you get? I'm trying to ask, when he talks about the agitation, he said things are being brought to the forefront. What things did he mention?
You mentioned democracy, didn't you? The fall of it. That's what he mentioned. I'm not saying I believe that. I'm just saying that what he said.
Well, he said there's some. What did you say, Natalie? Say that again. Sorry.
He mentioned the fall of democracy.
Yeah, subversion. Right. Okay. Yeah, you mentioned the subversion. When he talks about subversion, I think he means the act of overthrowing, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, the overthrowing of democracy. And he said, and it could also mean undermining of a power and authority of an established system. So basically, that's the same thing. It's an overflowing. And also, go on, sorry, Emma, were you going to say something?
No, I was just agreeing with you. That's how I understood it when he said subversion.
Right, okay.
I was going to add, Natalie said at the end of her comment that she didn't, she
Agree.
She basically inferred, she may not say it directly, that she didn't actually agree with him. And
right, okay.
I think I'm kind of like agreeing with Natalie. I'm not sure that the term subversion does not mean overthrow. I don't believe it does mean that. I think it means something else, actually. I think it means manipulation.
I actually looked it up, and it says the act of overthrowing, and also it says undermining of a power and authority of an established system.
Sure. So when you talk about undermining something, it means manipulation of it. So I don't think there's going to be I don't see any evidence that there's going to be an overthrow of democracy. Both parties are using democratic rules. If we might argue that they're not using the norms, but they're definitely following the rules of democracy. So democracy isn't being undermined, but it is being manipulated because it's manipulatable. You can manipulate democracy very easily. You can't manipulate an authoritarian or a dictatorship, but democracy by its very nature is able to be subverted. I'm using the term subverted to mean manipulated and misused.
Right, okay. Okay, thank you.
I think that's worthy of discussion, what people think about.
Yes, exactly. I was just going to ask that, because I was going to say the thing is, and it's not only that, how are they manipulating it then by the laws that they're putting in? Anybody? It's open to anybody.
I think the article that Elder Parminder shared this morning about from September, where the author was describing the past term in the Supreme Court and detailing what to expect in the upcoming term. The author made note of how Supreme Court justices and judges use originalism, like in past articles that we've read, to make their point or to shape decisions through the lens that they see them. And so I think, as what Elder Parminder said, it's not so much, a purposeful undermining of democracy, but it's, if you want to use these terms, finding loopholes, if I can use it that way.
And to make it sound legal and fitting within, make it sound legal or whatever, or legit or something like that. Is that what you mean?
I don't want to put it in those words because again,
it mean that.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah,
I know. I'm just asking the question.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't want to put it in those words. But what I was trying to say is using the structures that exist, and the weaknesses of those structures, if you want to put it that way, to further their goals and their ambitions. So it could very well be legal that they are doing so in these means, but it's doing so to shift the nation in a certain direction.
Definitely. I agree.
Could I add a comment?
Yeah.
I don't know if this agrees with what Curtis said, but they are using 100% legitimate means to achieve their end. The difference is, the reason why we might argue that it's illegitimate or that it's bad or whatever it is because they're using a different methodology. And the one that we have focused on in this movement for quite some time is the idea of either you have a living document, the Constitution, it's a living Constitution, which means it grows and adapts with society, or you have a different ideology, a different methodology, which the term that's used repeatedly now by us and in the world is originalism. So depending on how you view the law, you come up with different working models of what democracy would look like. So when a court says this is what this law means, for instance, the Supreme Court, how they define the execution of these laws, it all becomes legitimate. It's not against the law. It's how they define what you're supposed to do or what you can do. And it's all about a person's ideology. So this is what I think the subversion of democracy is about. It's not the undermining of it, and we might say the manipulation of it, but it's how you approach the subject. How do you approach, for instance, the Second Amendment in the 21st century? Can you apply originalism as it was deemed in, back when the Second Amendment was written? Can you apply that mindset then, today? The same with abortion rights. Can you take the framework in which the Constitution was put together and project that into the 21st century? Can you do the same with race and color and slavery and racism? Our answer is, of course you can't. Their answer is, whoever they are, the people that we oppose, say not only you can, but you're required to. And that's where we would say, or Elder Tabo has said, the subversion of democracy is happening. It's our view of that democracy is being subverted. Their arguments would be, the Supreme Court, is that we're going back and we're fixing democracy how it should be, because the people who have subverted democracy is not them, it's you, me, it's this movement, it's the people on the left. We're the subverters, we're the anomaly, we're the bad people according to them.
Right,
and
okay.
we need to understand that. We just say they're the bad people, but they're saying no, we're the ones who are trying to set things right. And how they're doing that? They're making America great again. That's what that means. They're correcting the mistakes that you and I believe are the truths.
Yeah, I've read about that, Elder Belinda. I've been reading about the Federal Society, and it's those group of people, lawyers from these elite universities, who have been changing this law to fit in with what they want to believe.
Exactly.
And so,
yes.
And because of these people, you can only be a member of the society if you're not a member of the society, because what they're doing, they're grooming these young people, these young university students, and what they're doing is they're having these debates, and they're using all these debates and seminars to influence the young ones so that they can be groomed to fit into the political world. Because when I looked into where these judges and all these people came from, they were all, most of them were, majority were members of this Federal Society. And the Federal Society are the ones who brought up this originalism, and they're trying to push people or shift them into these positions so that they will use the rhetoric that they've got to
Yes.
make these decisions.
Is that bad?
It depends. Well, if you're talking about reversing Roe versus Wade, yes,
not Roe versus Wade. Is it bad what they're doing? They're grooming people, setting them up, and all this.
I'll put this to you, Elder Belinda. When I read about it, I read that they felt that the liberal rhetoric was having dominion in every area. So they wanted to have a say in what they believe. So this conservative Federal Society wanted to have a word, have a chance to sort of speak up about things as well. But now, and they were afraid because they felt that this liberal thing was dominant. But now they've become the dominant, the very thing that they were frightened of. Now they've become dominant, and they want to make sure that they are the dominant ones, because that's and the reason how they've done that is through conservative money pouring into their societies. They've grown. And they're taking people, especially from these elite universities, and that's how they're pushing their agenda. But now they've become the dominion ones.
Is it bad? Is it bad what they're doing?
Well, I think it leads to become bad, yeah, because they're going to be pushing their rhetoric on things to push things out the way, because that's what they're doing. So I don't think what they're doing is good. No.
And as you said that, and I think correctly, they created themselves as a backlash to what they say the left or the liberals are doing. So if you had said all of this and it wasn't the Federalist Society, it was the leftist society, would you think that was all bad?
Well, no, because I see what you mean, but I know, but they haven't, like I keep saying to Roe versus Wade. Well, I mean, they're not going to overthrow Roe versus Wade, aren't they?
My only point in all of that is when we talk about the subversion of democracy, what we're really talking about is people's view of what democracy, what America or whatever country we're talking about would look like. And both parties are doing the same thing. They're all doing their own grooming. They've all got their secret super donors. They're all doing their bribery techniques, putting in the judges that they want. It's all politicized. And because we are firmly on one side of this argument, when we look at the other people doing it, we say, what a bunch of bad people. How can they be evil, corrupt Federalist Society? But the left do their own version of that. And we say, well, that's good if we're doing it, but it's bad if they're doing it. And I'm not saying that it's good for everybody to do it. My only point is that everybody is using legitimate democratic ideas or rules or principles to push their agenda. And I think this point is important because in the past, this movement, because of the way we've read inspiration, has not understood this point. And it's come as a rude awakening because we thought we're going to have some kind of papal monarchy in America. And that's how it's all, and democracy is going to collapse and destroyed and the Constitution is going to be burnt. But what we find is in the agitation of the Sunday law, one of the things that's being promoted is the Constitution, its strength, its beauty, its power, its glory. It's actually the Constitution that's being used to create the Sunday law crisis, which is something that's radical and Adventists don't understand. And this movement hasn't. And I'm not sure if we individually or corporately even have still got to grasp with this, that democracy is the weapon of choice to create a Sunday law. And that's a rude awakening to us.
Yeah, but what it leads on to, what this other society leads on to, they are going to be treading on people's rights. So is that good or is that bad?
The left tread on people's rights too. Everybody treads on everybody's rights. That's what democracy does. Democracy will always tread on your rights. If I want my right to carry my gun in Times Square, the left say, we're going to trample on your rights to do that.
Right, okay.
And I'm saying, you can't trample on my rights. It's my Second Amendment right. And they say, of course we can.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So basically, I want to bring out to the fore, so I think Elder Bevin has done that. He spoke about issues that are going to be brought into this agitation. So in other words, culture wars, which is what we just spoke about, in the political battles that are going to be waged against that. And also certain legislatures that are going to be, that are happening in various countries as well, more so of the USA, which is being bought out, and we can read more about that, which it really boils down to, and also, about democracy, and also the entrenching of patriarchal oppression. So he talks about gender equality, and he talks about the testing issue in those areas, and also what he brought out was, of course, the degrees of inspiration that's going to be used by using these two type of prophets that are out there externally. So we're looking externally. For us to understand what's going on, we need to look externally, which is what he brought out. And he said the two types of prophets that are going to be used, of course, is the movement, so the Stone of Daniel, and also journalists, the people who sort of, talk about what's happening out externally as well. So these are the two prophets. And then he spoke about, you know, other things like the Levites and Nephilims. I'm not really sure if it brought it out in this, but I know in the next 2 minutes we're going to talk about that. So does anybody else want to add to what their understanding of these first 10 minutes are, or can we proceed on the next 10 minutes?
Can I just ask people's understanding? When we say external prophets, are we saying that, yeah, okay, they're prophesying the issues to the Nephilims, to the world? I'll just keep it at that. But are they're talking about the issues, but they're not really prophesying the agitation. They're only prophesying, they're not prophesying, they're not prophets in that sense, they're just prophesying the issues of the Sunday law. Do we all agree on that or disagree?
Yeah, and do you also believe that this sort of, the messages that they're hearing, is it developing then? Because I know that a lot of people have the idea that they were supposed to come to us and we were supposed to help develop them into understanding the issues. So how's that going about as well? I'll ask that question as well.
I would just to Natalie's question, I think that it's easy for us when we hear the term prophets to think of being a prophet in a monolithic way, as in projecting something into the future, i.e. The question being, are these journalists saying what's going to happen in X amount of years? But we have countless cases in the Old Testament and today of a prophet's role being more than just that. If we think of Jeremiah going into the courts of the king and detailing what is happening in the state of Israel, or prophets giving warning of what is happening in the country, in the nation, we can see journalists doing that very thing, just reporting and giving detailed evidence of what is taking place and why those things are taking place. By looking into history, we can see that as being a role of a prophet as well. And so I think expanding our vision of what a prophet does, journalists can easily fall into that category.
Okay, thank you. Right, does anybody else have anything to add in the first 10 minutes of what we just spoken of, or can we proceed on now to the next 10 minutes? Okay, what we'll do, we'll proceed.
When it comes to the fulfillment of prophecy, you have to know what you're looking for. You have to know what the fulfillment of prophecy looks like. Right, you have to be paying attention to the progressive developments that represent the fulfillment of prophecy, because the fulfillments aren't always a single spectacular event, but the fulfillments are often progressive developments. And to track that progression, you have to be paying attention, right? I guess in connection with that, we want to look at the developments that have been taking place in various states in the United States that touch on the issue of equality, on gender equality, and the broader issues surrounding gender equality, LGBTQ rights, and so on. But before we begin our review of some of the legislation, I just wanted to bring us back. You may remember, I think it must have been 2019 now, when we're talking about Project Blitz, and how Project Blitz, it was a Dominionist organization founded in 2016. It was part of the Christian right, and its purpose was to, reading a quote, to protect the free exercise of traditional Judeo-Christian religious values and beliefs in the public square, and to reclaim and properly define the narrative which supports such beliefs, right? And how did they go about this? Do you remember? They would frame model legislation that they would, like, templates for legislation forwarding various objectives that they had. Those objectives were, promoting religion in schools, for example, anti-LGBTQ legislation, and they would give this model legislation to conservative legislators, conservative politicians, to then propose in their respective state legislatures, right? And part of their strategy was, and it's in the name Blitz, to inundate the legislative space with their material, almost in a way to keep those who oppose them constantly on the defensive, playing whack-a-mole. I don't know if you know that game, whack-a-mole, right? It's to just inundate the space with their ideas, right? To almost make it hard to know where to focus because there's just so much of it, right? And that is what we're seeing now is reminiscent of. That is what it looks like. It looks like the Project Blitz playbook, except, to a much greater extent than anything that we've seen up to this point. And it's effective, it's working. It's working. So you may remember a few weeks ago, Jonathan was here and he shared a website from the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. And that's a very good website to take a look at, because it's tracking the legislation. It's currently tracking 435 pieces of anti-LGBTQ legislation that are being proposed, that have been passed, or that are in the process of debate right now. As of today, there are 435 pieces of legislation, anti-LGBTQ legislation that Republicans are trying to push forward at different levels. And the website, well, firstly, I think today what I'd like us to go through is anti-LGBTQ legislation, because that's one prong, a very visible prong of the right-wing strategy that we're seeing at play today, even in the culture wars, in the news cycle. It's, there's all this sort of hyped up talk about, trans people. Trans people are the issue right now in public discourse, and what their rights are and what their rights aren't are, and framing them as predatory and as dangerous, and forwarding legislation to suppress them, right? That of course touches on equality, and then there's anti-abortion legislation that I want us to look at. As well, to sort of see where things are with that, because there's a lot happening at the state level on that front as well, which is having real life impacts to to people, to women on the ground, right? Roe v. Wade was the flashpoint, but there's a lot happening, which is constituting that creep towards the Sunday law, towards entrenched patriarchal oppression. Okay. I hope that is all clear so far.
Okay, we'll stop there. So what does those after those 10 minutes, what did he start to address after? So what was he addressing after we stopped the previous stop? So what's he addressing here? And what did he bring out, and what did you understand about it? So he talks about LGBTQ rights. He talks about Project Blitz. He talks about the ACLU.org, which is the American Civil Liberties Union. So what did people understand what he was talking about in this part, in this little section that we had? Does anybody want to elaborate, please?
I think Debsy was just bringing out how there was a plan with Project Blitz about bringing anti-LGBTQ.
You spoke about this. You did a presentation about this, didn't you?
Yeah,
yeah, you did. Yes, I thought you did. Yeah.
And then he brings in abortion, and then I think he talks about the importance of those two things as we lead towards the Sunday law. I think something like that.
Right, okay, thank you. But does anybody else want to elaborate what he was talking about?
Okay, I just want to say that he talked about the transgender as well, how their rights are being taken away.
Yeah, that's really been brought up now, hasn't it, for some reason? And he said that there was an issue there, that people were thinking they were dangerous, and you know, they're sort of oppressing trans, for whatever reason, it's really come out in the fore now. All this oppression against transgender people. Thank you. What else did he bring out? I was looking deeper into the ACLU, so the American Civil Liberties Union, and I agree with him. I think this is. Has anybody gone and looked at this particular website?
Yes.
You have. It was quite good, because what they do is they do track it. They track every kind of legislation that's been brought against LGBTQ, and I think there's other things in there. I didn't go into all of it, but it was interesting to see 435 pieces of legislation of anti-LGBT. I mean, that is amazing. And so it's good that some, this type of society is looking deeper into this and what's going on, so they can keep an eye of what, of every sort of legislation that's coming in and oppressing the people. I think it's good that we've got an organisation that does that. And he's found out that this is a right-wing strategy. And of course, when we look into that, this is part of the culture wars. Does anybody else want to say anything? And then he spoke about the Constitution and how that's brought out of the fore as we creep towards the Sunday law. And we can see more and more patriarchal pressure, and we during this period in time, we need to understand what the legislation is targeting. So does anybody else want to add to that? Curtis, would you like to add to that?
I'm okay for now. Thanks, Debbie.
Yes, okay. Emma, you've been quiet. Do you want to add anything to this?
Sorry, who?
Is that you, Emma?
No, that was Natalie.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to, as I was saying, you've been quiet, so do you want to add anything just to this last part before we close?
No, that's fine. No, I think.
Oh, right, okay.
I just wanted to add that even though there's 400 being inundated into the legislatures, that all have passed, and many have been revoked, but some have passed that, like I've done in my presentations, that have had detrimental effects on transgender minors and individuals.
You mean out of those 435?
Yes, we've seen some that have been passed. Like I think I talked about it in my last presentation last week.
Yeah,
many of just the pain and the pain it's going to cause on minors, and
I'm just amazed. There's 435 of them.
They've not all been passed.
I'm just saying. Yeah, I realise that, but I'm just saying that I'm amazed that there's that many.
That's a tactic, isn't it? That's a tactic to overwhelm people, so they have to pass some.
Right, okay then.
I suppose I had a question. I don't know whether,
yeah, go on.
In line with the whole democracy being undermined,
Yeah.
In a sense that we're saying that on one level it's not, because it's still following all the laws, but everybody's still following law on both sides, but they just want their agenda. And in the past we would have agreed with the right-wing agenda. Now we've switched sides, we agree with the left-wing agenda. So there are obviously two camps in America, probably more than two, but two major camps, one agreeing with the right, one agreeing with the left. If more people, or the majority, agree with the right, like if more people agree with Trump, then isn't democracy actually being carried forward? Because democracy is the government of the people, for the people, by the people. So it's their voice being heard. And if you can say that people are influenced by conspiracy theories on one level, but if the majority of the people agree with the right-wing agenda, like they're anti-trans, they're pro the family, and we've said this, that atheists, men's rights, and all those groups are similar. It's a culture war. That if most of the culture agree with it, then isn't democracy working, in the sense that the government's going with what most of the people believe?
Oh, I see. Oh my gosh.
On that, Emma,
Yeah.
again, just it's a question of your question.
Yeah.
In thinking of what democracy entails. So I know that we frame democracy as government for the people, by the people.
Yeah.
Is there not an element in that also of protecting those that are in the minority? So I don't know how that will work, but yeah, so as much as you have the majority in power, there is an element, I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, of the minority who weren't voted into power, so to speak, who need to be protected as well. And that falls under the banner of democracy. I don't know if I articulated that well. I'm just processing.
I kind of got interrupted, so I half heard that, but I'm thinking you're saying that, did you say that that's not really democracy if they're just fighting for the minorities? Is that what you're saying?
Or if they're not fighting for minorities.
If they're not.
Because the part of democracy, part of the whole umbrella of democracy would mean that they're protecting the rights of minorities. Yeah. So I guess it goes back to freedom versus equality, is that whole argument about giving people freedom, because the right would argue that they are protecting the rights of minorities, however you look at that. On one level, they would say we're speaking out for the family, or we're speaking out for women, or to protect them being mothers, or they'd have an argument for, and that they wouldn't want to do harm to those minorities at the same time they're taking their voice away. So that, they'd argue it that they were still doing that perhaps, but the reality is they're not. Yeah, but I see your point. I don't know.
I don't get the question because I was interrupted.
I think the point was, because I was saying, isn't there an argument that says if the majority believe the right-wing agenda, then democracy is working, because the democracy says the majority of the people should have the voice, and if they all say right-wing's right, then democracy is doing its job, isn't it? Because it's giving the people the voice, the power.
Yeah.
Even if you say they're persuaded by conspiracy theories, some of them don't know what they're talking about. But if most people are on the right agenda, I think probably from the voting we can see that it's 50-50 really. But what's wrong with that? So then Kirsty's question on the back of that was, yes, but shouldn't true democracy really be about defending the rights of the minority, and then doing that the right? But I think we could argue that they would argue they are doing that, depending on who the minority are. Yeah, it's just a question about, it's just semantics about who's the minority in the right. Yeah, difficult.
Okay, then we're going to stop here now, and I don't know if anybody wants to add anything to just this small part that we've had. I mean, it's just quite a lot. It's nice to sort of understand what he's addressing and go over because I think there's some things in here are very important that he's drawing out. So we'll stop there, and if anybody wants to add anything else to this, you can do so. Yeah, Debbie, there was a point that he mentioned at the beginning, which I think is an important point, and I don't know if we discussed it. It was how, when we look at events in America and how Americans look at events in America, whoever's got their lens there, looks at things that solely take place at the federal level. We're not looking at the state level. That's what he brought. Yeah, exactly. And yet a lot goes under the radar that happens at state level. I know after some time, it may boil over into being a Supreme Court case. But there are a lot of cases that the Supreme Court either refuses to not see, or that just don't make it to Supreme Court level. And so
filters into how the states operate. And for a large part, there's a lot of battle that takes place there in the context of culture wars.
I remember that he said that they're not bringing it out in the news, they're not bringing it out or looking at that, are they? I think he said.
Can I just make a comment, please? Roe v. Wade, the judges sent it back to at state level, didn't they? Let them make their minds up. Curtis?
Yeah. So I think that is what happened, but I was alluding to other things that don't even make it up to them giving that opinion. But yes, you're right in saying that, Natalie.
Okay.
So going back to how we used to think the Sunday law was going to be passed, I think all of us believed it was a federal level, but we didn't think about state level. But on the other hand, we also used to think as well that it would be majority of people that want a Sunday law. Majority of people don't want Sabbath. They don't want those things that we're standing for. So it would be the same with this. In that sense, I think the majority do want the right-wing agenda. If we look at it from how we used to see it, that most people are taking the wrong side on this question.
It will be a democratic Sunday law.
A democratic Sunday law. Did we used to think it was democratic Sunday? I guess we did. Legislators would agitate for a Sunday law and they'd all want it. And we'd be saying, no, wait a minute, this is not what God wants. So I guess
no, I thought we was supposed we
did, but we thought that America would pass a Sunday law, didn't we? And then it would be worldwide. So gone.
I don't know how we measure majority, because like if we just look at America's voting system, the Democrats have won the majority vote for I don't know how many years, despite there being Republican presidents or Republican judges. And the fact that judges are appointed by the president, who's put in place by people who didn't have the majority of the say, I don't think it's as easy for us to say that the majority are in the opinion of, conservative worldview, in America at least, at a law level, if we want to speak that way, because of the fact that you have, what's the type of voting where it's
proportional representation.
Yeah, because of proportional representation. That's not really reflective of the majority in its truest sense.
But that's most countries of the world, isn't it? Even in Britain, we don't have proportional representation, because that's been the Liberal Democrats' argument for years, that because of the way the seat plans are drawn, just like the way the maps are drawn in America, that the people that get in are not the majority necessarily. They're not what the majority of the people want, or that it's not represented, the number of votes compared to the number of places that they get. I think that happens everywhere. But probably. Yeah. But I suppose there is on top of that element of what we used to see the Sunday law as. I mean, I know Natalie just referenced how we used to think the papacy was going to do something. And I think that element of deception was always in there as well, that the people are deceived into doing this thing. And then they realise at the last minute, actually, this is not what we want. We didn't want you to do this. So I don't know whether we've just changed our whole view of that now. But still the people will be surprised if these laws get passed. They'll recognise the length and breadth of it and go, actually, this isn't what we want. And what you're saying is most of the people don't want it anyway. If you look at that the Democrats won the overall vote.
Okay. Thank you so much for participation in this presentation today. I'm sure we'll go away with and really sort of reflect on the things that have been brought out on it. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining in today. I'm just going to stop the sharing here. Right, okay, so that ends the presentation today. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to pray, and I'll hand it back over to Deborah. So where you can kneel, please do so. So dear Holy God, we thank you so much, Lord, for the presentation that we had today, people that were here, and the debates that we've had, and the discussions that we've had, and the understanding that we can have and draw from it. So we thank you, Lord, that we really need to open up our minds and understand where you're leading us and getting ready and prepared, Lord. So we thank you, Lord, and please continue to be with the rest of the Sabbath school today, and to bless all those who are here. So we give you thanks and praise in and through our beloved Saviour, always to your great honour and glory. Amen. Over to you, Deborah.